Hey everyone, Joe Menza here. Welcome to another watercolor painting video. This painting, I'm using Strathmore 300, putting a clip on here. I like painting these right in the pad. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wet this one down. So one of the subjects I wanted to discuss was using less expensive paper. Now, obviously, using the best of the best materials is going to get you the best and most consistent results using Daniel Smith paints or Winsor & Newton Pro, artist paint, professional, and using cotton paper 100%. Those are the cream of the crop. That's the most expensive though. So if you're doing this as like a nice hobby, you just want to have fun, as I've always talked about, then you're going to spend more money. Some of these tubes of paint cost $10, $20 a tube. And if you paint a lot like I do, it's a lot of money you're spending on this stuff. So for practice, you want to use more economical materials. And one of the ways that I've dealt with over time, and I haven't talked about it too much, but in future videos, I'm going to start going into that more and more because I think I've sort of perfected it in a way. And that's the way that I've overcome the challenge. And I read this in an article. Someone said, well, when you use economical paper, student grade paper, practice paper, you have to figure out these ways around the challenges or the problems that occur that you don't have to do with cotton paper. And in doing that, I came up with something I kind of like what I'm doing, and that's I'm adding white to my paint. Now, you do get a little bit of a pastel look, but you can see in the sky I've added white to the ultramarine blue and the purple. And you can see it does have a different little look to it, but the way it lays down on the paper, it's almost like the gouache has like a little smoothing effect on the paint itself. So it just doesn't, if you put more water, this is something you'd have to experiment with, and I have. If you wet your paper first and you mix a little bit of gouache in with the paint and you drop it in, it has an interesting effect for the sky. So you can mix it in, you can drop it into the white. You can put the white on wet, you can put the white on dry. You can mix the white in. And it's all different effects. And this is all my experimentation over the years of doing this. Let's see what happens if this happens. Let's see what happens if that happens. Very rarely have I gone into a painting and it's like, okay, I'm going to paint this technique and I know exactly from A to Z what I'm going to do and what's happening. It's almost like there's a football game playing out on the field. I know that I know the players. I know, some of the plays that we're going to do and some different strategies. But when I get in there and I look at the field and I say, okay, I start putting something down. Oh, that looks nice. Oh, I like how that looks. Oh, let me try this. And all of that comes together in the end for this work of art is what you're making. You're making a piece of art. And your history, your personality, everything that you have goes into this, into this one piece. And you hope other people enjoy it. It's kind of sad because I've read a lot of little, posts on like Instagram and Threads and the social medias, and some people get upset because people aren't really commenting or liking their work. It's the exposure. If you're into this because you're into it because I want to do art for social media, for me, that's just not the right. You're going to be headed for disappointment. Do it because you love the art first. Do it because you love the exploration of the art. Do it because you're on the journey. I know it sounds a little corny, but it is true. You're on the journey of discovery to see there's so many ways. That's my biggest problem with art is I've never really been a disciplined person where, okay, A, we're going to open this, and B, this is step 2, and C, this is step 3. I'm not really a steps person. I like to just kind of make it up as I go. And I don't really want to be beholden to any set of steps. So that's why I'm always like trying different things. But that's also a problem too, because If you have, you know, thousand, I could put in a sky 100 different ways. And you say, well, what way am I going to do it this time? Am I going to wet the paper first? Am I going to go in dry? Am I going to leave white open for clouds? Am I going to add white for this? Am I going to, at the end of the day, it can be dizzying. So for a lot of people, they need steps to follow, at least initially. That's what makes the Ron Ranson technique with the Hake brush, okay, so appealing, is that they give you that to start with. There's a guide. And then once you start to get comfortable with that, then you can start to deviate. So if you come on over to the shameless plug for our group, which we started because we really liked the Ron Ranson method. And we started the Ron Ranson Disciples group over on Facebook. So if you have Facebook and you want to join a nice group, small group, you have to answer a few questions. Come on over, and with some like-minded folks in the art world, and share your work, share your techniques, share what you're doing. And it's no promotional. We were pretty strict on, it's really a club that is following sort of beginner techniques. You don't have to do exactly what Ron Ranson did. You can deviate from that. But it's the idea of we do simplistic work, simple techniques, and it's about loose painting, not about detail, not about fussing. Now you noticed here I made these mountains. I used a little bit of purple, a little bit of blue, and I scraped with a card this time. That's, again, you can paint your mountain, painstakingly paint. You can use a credit card, a plastic card, scrape away. You can leave them solid. That's another way you can go about it. You can lift with the brush. So for this, there's many, many different ways. Obviously, the simplest way is just put in a basic mountain in the background and use like a purple blue kind of distant mountain color and leave it. You don't have to get into the scraping and, anything complicated. Whatever is fun for you. And of course, I put a few little trees in the front there, and I've pulled that down. Now, when you're using the white, like I'm doing here, and you have white on the paper, if you've ever struggled with, first of all, if you ever struggle with skies, add a little bit of white. You'll see what I mean. If you've ever struggled with reflections, have a little bit of white down, and you can pull that brush down, especially if you have a clean, dry goat hair brush or a soft brush, and you pull down, it will help you create reflections. Again, the only trade-off is that you're going to end up with a little more of a pastel look. And you can see from these skies, we've got like sort of a pastel, almost a peachy color, a little purple, a little blue. I think it's nice. I think they're nice colors. And you can limit that, obviously. You can use less. If you don't mix the white into the paint, put the white down on the paper first. Try it both ways. Coat your entire paper with white paint, let it dry. Paint a scene on there and see what it does. Take a next piece of paper, put white on in the areas you're working, and put the paint in while the paint is still wet or semi-wet. And then try adding a little bit of white to your colors. I think putting the white down on the paper works best, in my opinion, from what I found. Putting the white, a wash of white, by the way. You're not putting it solid right out of the tube. You are mixing it a white wash. Now, the interesting thing about that white wash is that you can paint the sky, and I've shown this before. I used to keep some in a spray bottle. Let it dry, and then you're not happy with the sky. It doesn't look right, doesn't look blended properly. You can take that white and make a very light wash of white and recoat it on the top of whatever it is. It'll fade it a little bit, but it will blend that out. So white can really, really be a great correctional tool. It could be great for special effects. So for all of that, hey, don't ever use white in watercolor. I just, it's steering people in kind of a wrong direction, I think, when really it means let the white of your paper show through. But if you're adding a little gouache to your paint, you're technically you have a watercolor gouache painting, and those rules don't really apply. But if you're trying to stick to that and you eventually want to get better and better and enter art shows and things like that, then by all means, try to, stay within the purity of it. And if you don't want to use white, for me, I want to use everything. The only exception is that I never use, and I've used everything else in between, but I don't use black unless I'm out of like Payne's gray and I want to add blue to the black. But I never use black by itself. It just doesn't look right. It's just something about it. Maybe I'll find some special effect you can do with it down the road. I would imagine if you added white to it, you can now make gray. There's other ways of making grays, obviously. Red and green. If you add that in a proper balance, you can get grays. And so if you're sticking with that without the white, then that's how you do that. And if you want those darks without black, even if you don't want to use Payne's gray, you could mix alizarin, ultramarine blue, and burnt sienna in the proper ratio, and you will get a very, very dark color that way. Because even Payne's gray is too much. I've added on my palette, now I have the Daniel Smith palette, I have a color called neutral tint. Neutral tint doesn't really make it darkens the color without really making it blacker, if that makes any sense. So you see here, I've had these pine trees, and I know I kind of do the same scene a lot. It happens to be a scene I like. I like the mountains and the pine trees and the water, and I happen to like that particular scene. And it's something you're perfecting over time. It's one of those things. I don't know if you ever watched the movie Close Encounters with the Steven Spielberg movie where the spaceships come. And as Richard Dreyfuss is in that movie. And he keeps thinking about that mountain. And I think that's Wyoming. What do they call that, Devil's Mountain or something? And he keeps having visions of it because I guess these aliens put this in his head because they wanted him to go there. But he keeps having the vision, and he's making paintings, and he keeps doing things. And then eventually, spoiler alert, obviously, if you haven't seen it, 40, 50-year-old movie, he ends up getting all this mud and building a giant sculpture of this mountain thing in his living room. So he can't get it out of his mind. But it's kind of like that for artists when you have a particular scene in your mind and you keep going back to the well because you want to get it right. And that's kind of what's happening in art, really. You say, I could get, it's not perfect. I could get it. And the funny thing is that the next time you look at your painting that you did, a week ago, you go, yeah, you know what? That looks pretty good. I watch my own videos, and I'm actually telling myself, I'm saying, hey, that looks pretty good. Stop. I don't know what you all are doing. You can tell me in the comments if you're halfway through my video and you're like, you know what, it looks fine, leave it alone. There is that, you got to learn to train your voice to say, you know what, it looks pretty good, I'm going to stop here. I'm making videos, so it's a little different. I'm trying to get to somewhere and show things. But if you're doing it at home and you just get to a point where you're like, I don't know, just stop. You can come back to the painting later. You can go over the top and go over dry. You don't have to keep going. So it's hard in a video to make that call when you're filming and you want to have a complete painting scene. So you can always stop. You can follow these demos up to a certain point and say, you know what, I'm not going to do what he did. These are not, step by step by step by step for you to do. For me, when I watch these painting videos, I try to incorporate techniques into what it is that I'm doing. And in the end, it's going to be my own. There's things that don't work for me. I watch different artists where they slap in the sky and keep going over the top, or I've seen another one where they kind of do the, it's hard to describe as talking about it without showing it, but I've seen multiple ways of doing things. It's like when I do it, it doesn't work, doesn't come out properly. So I try it, and then I'm like, well, let me kind of deviate into this, and then I say, well, that kind of worked. So that's what you're doing with that. But don't be too harsh on yourself, because a lot of times when you're sitting there staring at a painting for a long time, when you go back to, you know, go back to it a week later, it looks kind of fine. So that's why you should keep it simple, less detail is, don't worry about every little leaf on a tree. Don't worry about every little branch. People will figure it out. Nobody's going to stand in front of your painting and go, boy, that would be nice, but there should be a trunk there, or, whatever. I mean, it could happen, I suppose, but it's not for you to really worry about why it was left or why it wasn't done. I just did a painting of a river scene. I was inspired by a painting I saw on a wall at a store, and I painted the whole thing. It looked really nice. I think I'll put the video up of it, and you'll see. I was more focused on adding the white and showing that. I did another video on that. And I didn't really add any, like, dirt underneath, like the shore where the water meets the foliage, something in between. It's just kind of the foliage over the water. And I go, well, should I go back and add that and add? Nah, I'll do another painting. I'm not going to put in something over the top that I thought about later. Let it stand on its own unique merit without tampering with it, and go do another one. Do a series. Sit down with yourself and say, hey, I'm going to do a river series. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paintings, whatever. And I'm going to do, all of it's going to be this series of paintings. Okay, this is my river series. This is my mountain series. This is my farm series, whatever it is that you're into. And do a few and do it different ways. And, sometimes they sell because people want things that look like they match up kind of together for their room. So sometimes they could be similar, and people want, 3, 4 river pictures together. They all go together. So do that and say, okay, well, the green here wasn't this or wasn't that. But I'm out of time. Thanks for everyone, and we'll see you on the next video.